fit like, ladies and gentlemen, loons and quines and abdy else that's watching. My name is Pauline Cordiner and I'm a storyteller from the northeast of Scotland, and I have been asked to tell a few wee stories for the TMSA Keith Festival. Now, when I was thinking of the stories that I was going to tell, I was inspired by the names of your lanes, which only just got their names a few years back, and this story was prompted by Craobhie Lane. It's a story which was told by Stanley Robertson, who was a great storyteller, traveller in the northeast of Scotland, and it's called Auld Craobhie. Now, Jack bade with his old mother in a tumble down old shack of a hoose just at the bottom of the hill. The reason it was fallen to bits, this house, was that the lairds that owned the land that they rented this wee cottage from, he was a cruel and horrible man. In fact, they used to call him the Auld Laird of the Black Hairts because they suspected that he was a warlock, a wicked one at that. But anyway, Jack's mother, she was getting on a bit, and the thing that she did to bring in a wee bit of money was she was allowed to go around the fences and pull off the wee bits of sheep's wool that got caught on the fences, and she would take it and she would comb it and she would spin it and she would dye it and she would knit it, and whatever it was that she made, she would sell it at the market. But as for Jack, well, he had to work for the laird to earn their keep, and he worked for him as a shepherd. And he'd worked for the laird as a shepherd since he was just a wee boy of about 5 years old. Can you imagine at that age? Well, he would take all the sheep up to the top of the hill where they would graze on the best grass, and he would sit underneath the shelter of a great big oak tree, the grandfather of all the oak trees, Auld Craobhie himself. Auld Craobhie would give him shelter for the sun in summertime and the summer's eves, and he would give him shelter for the rain and snow when the weather was nice and nice. Now, Jack had been sitting underneath this tree for so long, for so much of his childhood, going up and down every single day, that he listened to the songs of the birds since he was just wee. And if you're in amongst another language, you turn to pick it up. And Jack actually spoke the language of the birds. And it was almost Midsummer's Eve, and he could hear the birdies twittering, and they were all talking about flying away that night. And Jack said, "What is it that you're saying?" And they said, "Oh, Jack, do you nae ken? Tonight it's Midsummer's Eve. And this is the night. This is the one night in 50 years when all the trees lift themselves up for the grun and they go dancing down to the river, down to the water, where they take a great big drink. And this ensures the fertility of the land. This ensures that all the grass and the crops and the plants and the trees grow. This ensures that all the animals, hey wee bairns, and the humans too." Well, Jack gathered up all the sheep and he headed down to his mother after putting the sheep safely in their fold, and he rushed into the house and he said, "Mother, what's this about the trees dancing?" And she said, "Oh, Jack, I did hear that story when I was a wee bairnie. Yeah, every 50 years the trees, they get up and they dance. It ensures that the land grows and everything. But when they leave the holes in the ground behind them. And if you look in there, you can see all the treasures of the earth. But you've nae to tak too much for the earth, Jack, because every time you do, it'll take something back from you in return." Jack was thinking on this, and he was about to say, "Well, I'm going up tonight to see," when there was a great big banging on the door, and without even waiting for anyone to answer it, in came the laird. Now, the laird was a great big man with a great bushy beard and flaming eyes, and he said, "Right, I'm going out hunting tonight, boy, and I've got some of my friends up through the town visiting. They'll be hunting wi' me, and if I so much as see your scrawny face up there, you and your mother will be banished for my land for good. You'll have nowhere to live and nowhere to work either." And Jack promised that he would bide in the house. And off went the laird. Well, Jack's mother got him a piece and he tucked it underneath his ox dart, and just before he was leaving, she handed him something, and it looked, to start off with, like a wee ball of wool, and he wondered why his mother was giving him that, and he put it in his pooch, and she was saying, "Mind, Jack, take care of yourself, please, take care of yourself, young loon," and off he went. Well, Jack was whistling as he walked up the hill, and he was thinking of Catherine, actually. You see, Jack, he'd been at this job for a long time now. He was about 16-year-old, and he had a bit of a fancy for Catherine. She was the laird's maid, and he was thinking of her, and he was about to write himself a bonny wee song when he realised he was at the top of the hill already. And he sat there and he waited, and but a beautiful, beautiful summer's eve it was, and he could see in the distance. You know how in summertime, there's so much daylight, and nighttime only lasts for a few hours, and the colours of the skies, oh, it was just beautiful. And he sat and he watched the sundown. Well, it had only been a few minutes past since the last rays of the sun had gone down, and the sky was starting to darken and go all those beautiful colours, when he started to hear a noise. You see, it was deathly quiet otherwise, because all the birds had left the trees as soon as the last rays of the sun had shone. Even the insects seemed to have gone. He couldn't hear anything at all, apart from a noise. It was like boom, 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 kind of like a heartbeat. Boom, boom. And he felt a bit uneasy at this, so he got up and he climbed in behind the long dry stone dyke that went up the back of Craobhie, and he watched. But as he watched, he realised that the boom boom, it was almost like music. And indeed, Craobhie was starting to sway, his branches moving, and as Jack keeked over the wall, he could see that the roots of the tree were moving almost like they were tapping their feet. Boom boom. Boom boom. Well, it soon got really dark, and the moon came out and it was shining down, and Craobhie was starting to move more now, and the branches were swaying, the branches were moving, and all of a sudden, with a great big ripping, creaking sound, the roots wrenched themselves out of the ground one by one, and Craobhie started to walk upon his roots down the hill, all the time moving as if he was dancing. And when he got halfway just down the wee path, he turned and he looked at the rest of the trees, and then all the sycamores and all the pines and all the rest of the wee oaks, his children and his grandchildren, they too were swaying, and they too wrenched their roots out of the ground and started moving down the hill. And then they turned and they looked, and the willows and the silver birch, they too rose from their spots. And Jack watched in amazement in the moonlight on this midsummer eve as all the trees left the hillside bare and went down to the river to drink and dance. Wow, that's amazing, Jack thought. He could kind of see some sort of sparkling coming from the hole that Craobhie had left behind, and he was just about to teet over the wall again and look when all of a sudden there was a clattering of hoofbeats. Jack hid behind the wall and he saw that it was the laird. The laird stopped his horse on the path, swung down. He had a lantern in his hand and a sack over his shoulder, and he shouted out, "It's true, the legend's true. All of the treasures of the earth are there and they're mine." And without waiting, the laird leapt down into the hole, and Jack could hear him laughing and crying with happiness and joy as he put something into the sack. Jack crept along the back of the old dry stone dyke, hopped over it, and looked down into one of the smaller holes left by one of the smaller trees. He jumped down into the pit and he could see what the laird was shoveling into his sack, because in the hole were great big chunks of gold and silver. There were shining diamonds and rubies and emeralds and sapphires, and he bent down and he picked up this bonny stone, and he said, "See this stone? It's huge. With this, my mother wouldn't need to live in an old shack. I could build her a palace." And he popped it in his pocket. And he bent down and he remembered what his mother said about not taking too much from the earth. And he thought, I don't need much, but see this lump of gold. With this lump of gold, I could ask Catherine if she would marry me. It would make rings for both of us. She could be my wife, but I would need to look after her. You cannot look after her as a shepherd. And he bent down and he picked up one fine, green, shining stone, shining in the moonlight, and he said, "With this, I could take myself off to school. I could learn. I could be a doctor maybe, or a teacher. I could open a school in the village." And that went into his pooch as well. And Jack turned round to climb out of the pits, out of the hole. But when he did, he found that there was darkness all around him. And he looked up and he saw that the pit, which had only been just a shallow pit, was now deep within the earth. For whatever you take from the earth, it will take back in return. Every time he'd taken a stone and popped it in his pocket, he'd sunk his full height into the ground. Now Jack was a tall lad. He was many feet below, and he thought he could climb up the roots, but of course the trees had pulled their roots out of the ground. He had no idea how he was going to get out of this hole, but he jumped and he scrabbled and he jumped and he scrabbled. And he thought, it's going to be getting light soon, I'll be trapped here. But just then he heard a voice. "Jack! Jack! Where are you? I went to your house. Your mother said you were up here. Where's all the trees gone?" "Over here, Catherine, over here," he shouted. And there he saw the silhouette against the moon. It was Catherine. She'd come looking for him. She said, "How am I going to get you out of that hole? Go and have a look at the laird's horse. He might have a rope or something." She came back. There's no rope there. And it was then that he remembered what was in his pooch. What he'd thought was the ball of wool. He pulled out, and it turned out it wasn't a ball of wool, but it was a ladder. A ladder made out of wool. He tried the strength of it, and it was strong, because wool breaks easily, but this was made with his mother's love. And he took the ball and he tossed it up to Catherine, who caught it. She took the other end of it and she braced herself, because she was a strong country lass, and it tumbled down into the hole, and Jack was just able to grab the end of it and climb up this wee woolen ladder until he'd escaped. They looked down the hill, just the slightest hint of the morning sun in the distance, and they could see that the trees were dancing and twisting and turning each other, but it did look as if they were slowing down. And every now and again old Craobhie would look up the hill and gesture to the other trees that it was time to return. So they went to the hole where the laird was still shoveling all the jewels into his sack, and they looked down and down and down, and way off, seemingly miles in the distance, they saw the wee light of his lantern, and they shouted, Lairdie, you must stop, you must return the jewels. You're going deeper and deeper into the earth." But he was so fixated by how much money and jewels he could get that he didn't even lift his head, and he said, "I told you, boy, you'll be thrown off my land for coming up here tonight. Leave me alone now." And he shoveled, and deeper into the earth went the laird of the Black Airts. And Jack and Catherine looked up, for the trees were returning now. They were finishing their dance. And the silver birches and the willows lowered themselves into the ground, and so did the sycamores and the pines and the wee oak trees. And finally, last to settle down and slide his roots back into the ground and settle down on top of the laird, was Auld Craobhie. And the trees stopped moving, and the heartbeat, which had been there the whole time, died away, and the sun rose. The laird was gone forever, but his nephew came, and his nephew ruled over the land, and his nephew was a very different mind. He was a very, very different personality. He was kind, and he treated the people on his land well. As for Jack, he was able to build for his mother a brand new house. He took himself off, and he got himself schooling. He got himself learning, and he opened the first school in the village. And Catherine, well, she married Jack. And I have to say, they all lived happily ever after. So I hope you like that story, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the festival. And thanks for listening. Goodbye.